Good evening. Today we are here to discuss the GS paper 4 for the mains examination that was there in the UPSC exam this year, 2022. So, the ethics paper overall, the review has been that it has been a somewhat lengthy paper. And why? Because the GS paper 4, there is something unique about it. The unique thing is that it's not just a paper of writing. It's not just asking you a question and it's not just that you have to write an answer. But there are other elements that are involved here. Normally, there is a thinking part that is involved, right? It requires a lot of application of mind, it requires a lot of comprehension, it requires a lot of interlinking of concepts. It's fairly an analytical type of paper. But this year, something which is new, something which is special is that it is becoming a more of a reading paper also. So this new thing that has been added on now, this new skill set that you're being tested on is what? Is your reading ability. So, for those of you who were there in the examination, you would appreciate it a lot more. And those of you who've not written this exam yet, they would not really appreciate the fact that being exhausted after writing GS1, GS2, GS3, and the essay, after doing all of these papers, trying to put your focus, trying to put your mind, and trying to rein in your ability for this paper is something that makes it even a little bit more challenging, right? Because by the time that you get to your ethics paper, you are an exhausted aspirant. So, therefore, what do we have to practice? We also have to practice the fact that can we perform when we are exhausted? Can we perform when we are tired? Can we perform when we don't want to? How do you motivate your own self to attempt this paper to the best of your ability? So, that is another skill set that is tested here. Now, with that in mind, let's look at the questions. We'll begin with part A, the theory part. The first question, part A, reads: Wisdom lies in knowing what to reckon with and what to overlook. What does that mean? It means that wisdom, the ability to understand things, that sort of wisdom comes from where? It lies and it comes from knowing what to put your mind to, what to focus on, what to keep in priority, and what not to, what to ignore, what to overlook. All right, so that is the first part of the thesis statement. What are these statements in the beginning? We call them the thesis statement, right? The next thing it says is an officer being engrossed with the periphery, ignoring the core issues before him, is not rare in the bureaucracy. Oftentimes it happens that the officer, that the person in charge, his focus gets diverted away from the things that he's supposed to focus on, but on something that is on the periphery. So that reduces what? The officer's output, the officer's results, right? Now, the question begins from here. Do you agree that such preoccupation of the administrator leads to the travesty of justice to the cause of the effective service delivery and good governance? Again, the question itself is very long. What are they asking you? They're asking you, what is your opinion? Do you think that being preoccupied by something at the periphery does injustice to the service, this thing, the service delivery of the bureaucracy? Is that what is happening? All right, and they're also linking it to good governance, and then you're asked to critically evaluate. Essentially essentially this entire question could also be: how is the skill of the prioritization critical for civil servants analyze? Isn't it? Essentially, this is what the entire question could boil down to. Now, looking at this question in the exam paper, this skill, this skill of looking at this long question and coming to the conclusion of what is it that they're trying to ask me, that is called question interpretation. As long as your question interpretation is strong, as long as you're able to identify exactly what is it that the examiner is trying to ask you, till that time you'll be able to structure your answers correctly. You will be able to identify the parts of the answer correctly. You will be able to make the correct headings in the correct paragraphs. So this skill is something which is becoming a lot more prominent, a lot more important in the ethics paper GS4. All right. So based on this question, what is the introduction going to be? The introduction is going to be something about wisdom. Wisdom enables civil servants to prioritize core issues instead of peripheral issues. For your value addition, you could tell me what these core issues could be and what the peripheral issues could be. As we say, the value of articulation in the GS paper 4 is very, very high. The more examples you're able to give me, the more substantiation that you create, the better your marks are going to be. So if you are able to tell me that, okay, the civil servant's core duty is to ensure what? Public service delivery. Yes. Now this will be a general example, right? A specific example could be what? That a chief information commissioner has to provide what? Pay effect to RTI Act, right? He has to work under the RTI Act. So that could be a more specific example. Now, the first paragraph is going to be what? That the preoccupation of peripheral issues is against good governance. So what did they ask you? They asked you the opinion. Do you think that preoccupation with something at the periphery goes against the core service mandate? Right? So in order for you to give me an informed opinion, you have to tell me yes, preoccupation with the peripheral issues, something which is not the core, which is not the most important thing to do. If you keep your focus on something that is peripheral, it is bad for service delivery. But the counter view is what? That sometimes the civil servant has to have some view, some occupation, some focus on peripheral issues also. He cannot be just narrow minded and only focus on the few 4-5 things that he has to identify as something that is the core. So you give me both of these opinions. In the first paragraph, what are the arguments that you can make? You could tell me that, okay, preoccupation with peripheral issues is wrong. You should only focus on the core issues. Why? Because there are limited resources, financial resources, human resources, all of that is limited, and therefore it has to be focused on the core issues, right? You can also say that preoccupation with something that is peripheral will cause delays in the core service, and then justice delayed is justice denied. You could say something like that. If you're aware of the Pareto principle, again, see, the better your arguments, the stronger your wording, the better your marks are going to be. What is the Pareto principle? Pareto principle is that 80% of your target can be met by focusing on 20% of your input. If you only focus on the more core issues, then you can do most of your work to the best of your ability. So that is called the Pareto principle. Here you can give me an example again. For example, focusing on the larger fish that have created the NPA issue in the country, right? So that sort of thing you can validate very quickly. What else can happen? One more point can be, we must fulfill our core function first and only then move on to something that is peripheral in nature, right? What else? You can talk about the citizen charter obligations that are there on the civil servants, right? It is their core mandate to first fulfill their objectives, their public service delivery outcomes that are outlined in the citizen charter. All right, that sort of thing could be there. Another argument could be that they have to focus on their public duty, right? If you want to mention the schools of thought from ethics, right, you could say something like, it is their deontological objective to focus on the core issues that the country is plagued by. All right, so you can give me as many points as you could, and again, the ethics paper is the most subjective of all of the other papers, and that also means that the arguments that you're giving me, sometimes it might happen that you're able to justify your stand by giving me some completely different arguments, right? As long as you're making rational sense, as long as your logic is sound, right? Do not worry that you will not get marks. This is not a matching paper. No, it is not that my opinion has to be the same as yours. It is not that every student here will give me the same analysis. Absolutely not. It is in this paper that everybody's uniqueness comes out to shine. All right. So you have to write whatever comes to your mind, everything that you find to be relevant. But remember to substantiate it to the best of your ability. All right. Now, the counter view. Peripheral issues also support good governance. How? Because it enables you to go above and beyond the usual. How? For example, if you need to have creative problem solving, right? If you have to have creative problem solving, then you need to be aware of the peripheral issues. You need to be aware of the things that are happening beyond your exact and core focus. What else? Focus on peripheral issues works against red tapeism, bureaucratization, because it keeps the process fresh, essentially, right? As long as you're involved in something which is not directly your work, and you are collaborating and you are working with other people, with other sectors, right? The the operation of the entire force, right, in silos, that gets broken down. All right, so there is integration. What else? You can affect organizational change. So long term change of the organization, long term development of the process itself, long term development of the public service authorities is only possible when you go above and beyond your everyday and routine activities, right? All of this will aid what? Transformation, leadership. You can give impetus to the vision that you can have for the future, that sort of thing. What is an example here? An example was the shift to the e-governance or the m-governance model. Just a few years ago, e-governance did not exist, but it was the vision, it was the creativity, it was looking at the peripheral issues that enabled a transformational change, right? A structural change in the nature of bureaucracy itself. All right, then what would be the conclusion here? You give me the conclusion about what your opinion is, right? You tell me about your opinion, that okay, I think that it is important to focus on peripheral issues also, but without letting go, without ignoring the core mandate. That's why wisdom is of paramount importance, isn't it? So that's how you can explain this particular answer. Okay, now moving on to the next question. Okay, apart from intellectual competency and moral qualities, empathy and compassion are some of the vital attributes that facilitate the civil servants to be more competent in tackling the critical issues or taking critical decisions. Explain with suitable illustrations. First thing you pick up is, if they're saying suitable illustrations, it means that it is a very, there is going to be a very high this thing uh, importance on the number and quality and type of examples that you're going to supply in this question. All right, now what are they trying to say? They're saying intellectual competency is one thing, moral qualities are another thing. Apart from these two, empathy and compassion are also vital attributes, right? It is not just that you should be smart, it is not just that you should be morally capable, but you should also have empathy, you should also have compassion, right? That will facilitate a civil servant, that will let you be a civil servant which can tackle critical issues, which can work in critical environments, take critical issues, and take critical decisions, right? And that all these attributes are essential. Okay, now you have to explain with suitable illustrations. Now, how do you divide this? You can give me a breakdown telling that okay, intellectual and moral qualities are both important for a civil servant, right? But empathy and compassion are also needed. Okay, now if that happens, the proportionality between these two parts should not be 50-50 here, right? Here you have to pick up that okay, because we're saying that not only is this important, that is also important, so this has to be somewhat lesser in proportion, right? Somewhat lesser in focus than the second part of the answer. But how are you going to operate here? What are you going to tell me? You can tell me the definition. You first begin by explaining what intellectual competency is, right? Then you can tell me how it helps a civil servant. Similarly, you tell me what moral qualities are and how and what qualities can help a civil servant, right? Here I've given you a lot of arguments, a lot of ways in which you could have articulated this. For example, for intellectual competency, you can tell me that, okay, it helps one understand the complexities of the situation, right? Example, you can give me about COVID-19 pandemic. During this pandemic, the civil servants, they needed to be aware, they needed to understand the reality, the happenings, the events in a multiple range of fields. You needed to know medicine, you needed to know law and order, you needed to know crisis management, logistics, cultural realities, cultural interactions, right? Human psychology. All of this was needed for a civil servant to understand, to handle this crisis, right? What else? It helps you advance the service goals. If you are intellectually capable, you will be able to understand what the organization's goals are, what the objectives are, and on basis of that you will be able to chase them, right? Further, having intelligent people, having intellectually competent people in the service also enables these people to create a culture of excellence. If the group itself, if the entire service is comprised of individuals who are intellectually competent, then the entire service will be a pool of highly intellectual elements, right? And then the organization, the group itself can supersede its targets. Sure enough, so that's how you can explain this. Then, how do you define moral qualities? You tell me that, okay, you can have these decisions that the civil servants are making. These decisions have long ranging implications, right? Because the decisions that are being taken, they will impact the lives of thousands and thousands of people, right? Everybody who's under their jurisdiction. So that's why it's very important for these people to have moral qualities. Now, what are these moral qualities? How do you remember these moral qualities? One very simple way that I usually recommend to my students is that you remember the foundational values that are there in the syllabus. So your foundational values, or the values from the Nolan committee. From there, you pick any and you give me an example. For example, you can tell me that impartiality is very important for civil servants. The Prime Minister of Norway was fined by a civil servant for breaking or breaching the social distancing norms. So imagine the type of impartiality that is there, right? This moral quality is imperative for civil servants, right? Other than that, you can talk about the Gandhiji's seven sins. So there are some arguments that we can use in multiple answers. One of those can be, if you remember, if you memorize Gandhiji's seven sins. So here what is applicable? Knowledge without character. This knowledge without character is something which will be problematic. Fair enough. So this is how you'll explain that intellectual and moral qualities are important. But empathy and compassion are also needed. Again, you define empathy, you define compassion, and then you tell me what is empathy. It helps one understand somebody else's suffering, so then you'll be able to work for that person a little bit better. For example, somebody whose pensions are being delayed, right? So if you have empathy for that person, if you understand the suffering of that person, you would be more inclined to look for new mechanisms to help that person, right? So it supports creative problem solving also. It enables out of the box thinking. All right. uh what else? The next thing you could do is you could define compassion, right? Here you can tell me that, okay, compassion enables people to take proactive action even before somebody is suffering. It is only compassion that you would want to it is compassion in you which will help you want to go around and take preventive action, to take proactive action, to help secure the needs, to secure the welfare of the people around you. Okay. Again, it will also help creative problem solving. Standard example here can be what? Standard example can be the example of IAS Armstrong Pym, right? For taking proactive action, you can talk about creating safe, secure environments for female students to study, primary girls, primary school girls, and things like that. Okay, you can talk about Gandhiji's talisman, right? That every time you should take a decision, think of the most uh, poor and uh, troubled person that you can, and think whether or not your action can help that person. Okay, so it keeps your decision making in context. Then how do you conclude? You can conclude that public service is crucial work and it requires a diverse skill set. So all of these skill sets are diverse and a well-rounded personality. All of these parts are important. Now, all of these arguments, all of these examples that I've given you, you can mix and match, create a a new mix. You can add your own examples, right? You could even mention the importance of IQ, EQ, SQ, AQ. IQ, intelligent quotient. EQ, this thing, emotional. SQ, social. AQ, adversity. All of these parts, all of these capabilities, all of these uh, skill sets are important for civil servants. All right, so that was question 1. Now, question 2, part A. It reads, the rules and regulations provided to all the civil servants are the same. Yet, there is a difference in the performance of positive minded officers who are able to interpret the rules and regulations in favor of the case and achieve success, whereas negative minded officers are unable to achieve goals by interpreting the same rules and regulations against the case. Discuss with illustrations. Again, discuss with illustrations means that the value of examples again here is a lot. And then what is the structure of the answer? Essentially, they said define uh, they essentially they're asking you, why is it that a positive mindset is better? How is it that with a positive mindset officers can give better results, and how is it that a negative mindset acts as an obstruction to delivery of service, right? Attainment of goals. So how do you begin? You begin by defining what a positive attitude will be, right? What a positive minded officer looks like, right? So they are what? They're cheerful, they're optimistic, right? Rules can guide behavior, but there is still certain discretion in which someone's positivity or negativity can affect the way that these rules are interpreted. Now, what are the characteristics of a positive minded person? Now, I'll just give you the arguments, right? And I expect my students to have strong examples, right? Clear examples, elaborations for all of these arguments. All right. So, what can happen? A positive minded person looks for opportunities, right? They have a problem solving approach. They accept a challenge or a crisis, right? Talk about COVID-19, talk about a climate crisis, talk about an extreme weather event. A positive minded person inspires others, right? It helps you become a good leader, right? It helps you become a good role model. Then you have to worry about nyaya and niti, right? Both of these things, the letter and spirit of the rules and regulation have to be followed, right? Again, give me an example of the implementation of some scheme. Talk about MDM scheme, midday meal scheme, right? Talk about pension scheme, things like that. Okay. Then this you have to create an opposition with negative mindedness. You can create a separate paragraph, or you can make it at the same parallelism. So the idea is you could make a table, or you could make two different paragraphs. Either way, whatever presentation you choose, right, you have to talk about negative mindedness next. What happens with negative mindedness? You have an escapist tendency. You tend to run away from problems. You tend to run away from complications and challenges. Then there can be victim blaming, high handedness, when you have the position of authority over the public. What else? This sort of person will fail in a crisis. Direct parallelism, right? Then they will display poor leadership because they will not form a strong role model type personality, right? It will be against personal public interest, right? It goes against deontological ethics. It goes beyond the greater good. It goes against the utilitarianism principle, right? What else? This sort of person is pessimistic. He looks at the glass as if it's half empty. Why am I giving you these diverse types of arguments? The point is that all of these arguments are created equal, right? You telling me that they're the sort of person who will be having glass half empty approach, that is just as good as somebody telling me that it's against utilitarianism, right? So whatever argument you could have thought of, that's good, but just give me clear, strong examples to support your views. Okay, then what is the conclusion going to be? Here in this particular question, giving me a way forward would be a positive thing. Why? Because we are telling the examiner that, okay, positive minded people are great, negative minded people are a problem, right? So we need more positive minded people, but how do we do it? So there, if you can give me some way forward and then conclude, it does help. And I do not mean an entire paragraph of say 5 points of way forward. No, a couple of points is just fine for us. All right. So what can you tell me in the end? You can tell me that, okay, improving civil servants' attitude is important. We can improve the intense incentive system. We can have better training. We can have more awareness campaigns, that sort of thing, right? And that will help us have what? Positive-minded officers, which are for the greater good of the society. All right, that's how you write question 2A. Now the next one is, it is believed, yes, question 2 part B, it is believed that adherence to ethics in human actions would ensure smooth functioning of an organization or a system. So they're saying that if you're ethical, then the society, then the organization will work smoothly. If this is true, what does ethics seek to promote in human life? What is it that ethics does in human life? How do ethical values assist in the resolution of conflicts faced by a person in their day-to-day functioning? So what are they saying? The primary demand is, what are the aims of ethics in human life, and how does it help you resolve dilemma, right? How does it help you resolve conflict? Okay, so how do you begin? You begin by defining ethics. Whatever description, whatever definition comes to mind that you must have prepared, feel free to write that in the introduction. The first paragraph is going to be aims of ethics in human life, right? What are the aims? It could be that they are a set of norms that guide our conduct, right? First thing is that they'll guide our conduct, how we behave, right? It helps us solve dilemma, aids decision making, right? It is contingent upon place, time, and character. So ethics keeps on changing according to the place, according to the time, the situation, and the character of the people involved, right? So you can talk about the sthan kal patra of these situations, right? Ethics also aims to give us multiple answers, multiple options to choose our own destiny with. So there is an element of free will that is associated with it, right? It helps us to discover moral principles. So one of the objectives of ethics is that with the study of ethics, you will eventually learn that, okay, these are the moral principles that are available. These are the thoughts of the philosophers that have been generated, right? Then you can also have, it helps to identify disagreements before they happen. If you're aware of people's thought process, if you're aware of people's different ethical motivations, right, then it is possible for you to identify, it is possible for you to predict the sort of conflicts that can be created in the society, right? What else? It helps us analyze socio-economic problems, right? It helps us to create a new dimension of understanding of why people are motivated in a certain way and why are they not. All right, then it helps to strengthen the conviction in your actions. So you might know what you want to know, but what you want to do, but the knowledge of ethics, makes it a little more clearer in your mind. It creates stronger conviction in your mind. It gives you stronger reason, stronger rationality to the way that you want to conduct yourself. Okay, so these are the aims of ethics in human lives. And then all of these aims, they come together and reflect in individuals, then their groups, organizations, and society. Why am I saying write this? Because it is a nod to the three thesis statement. See, the idea is, every time the examiner gives you some information, anytime the examiner gives you a statement, it is our job as a student, it is our job as somebody who's communicating, to pay some respect, to pay some focus, to give some attention to the sentence that has been made. So the question began with the fact that ethics helps a single person, and then that transfers into what? The benefit of the entire society. So that is why at the end of giving me the aims of ethics, you can give me a statement, a transition statement, telling me that, okay, individual ethics have a snowball effect on the society also. Right? Now, what is the utility of ethics? This is body 2. So what is the utility of ethics? Utility is, it helps you balance various aspects of life, your personal life, your professional life, your ambitions, right? All of those things can get balanced with the use of ethics, right? Um, it helps you identify what to do when your orders, right, or when your duty clash with the rules, right? Sometimes rules and laws can be wrong, right? And your this thing, orders or duty, can be different. Then it checks the abuse of power. It keeps you from doing things that are beyond your means when you have power and authority. Things like favoritism, things like nepotism. These things are discouraged by what? By the understanding and use of ethics. Then it helps you resist the influence of feelings and opinions, right? Somebody who's ethically strong, ethically clear, you will be able to identify your way forward, identify what your course of action has to be, irrespective of how you feel, right? Irrespective of your own personal opinions. It prevents your actions to be colored by your emotions. Then, uh, the utility of ethics is it's not just helping the person who knows ethics today. If you know ethics, if you understand ethics today, you're it's possible, it's contingent upon you to explain this, to teach this to the next generation. And once they are taught these ethics, then it has the ability to help them too, to make their own decisions, to make what? Strong convictions, to have to decide what to do when there is a dilemma, that sort of thing, right? Then it also creates the moral fiber of the society, and it maintains this moral fiber of the society. Again, this utility of helping people decide dilemmas, right? Decide and pick a side in a conflict, right? This understanding of ethics also translates into what a lot of people will do as a society, what we choose to do as a society. That is also something that is mandated by ethics. All right. Then in the conclusion, of course, you can tell me about the importance of ethics. You can tell me some of the conflicts that are that are seen, right? You can tell me about how we should inculcate better ethics in the world, right? That sort of thing you can tell me in the conclusion. Now, we're at question 3. Question 3 contains 3 different quotations, right? So the way that we handle quotation questions is slightly different, right? A quotation is directly in your hands, right? There is no set structure of how to handle a quotation. So all of these points are going to be very, very suggestive in nature. Naturally, what you think about about a quotation, what does each of these quotations mean to you, is going to be different, because I have different use, different students everywhere. All right. So as long as, again, it makes sense, as long as it is articulated well, be assured that your answer will be okay. These outlines here are also useful for the students who will be writing mains in the future, right? For you, it can be helpful that you can be aware of the different types of thought processes that can exist. All right. So, the first quotation is what? Ethics is knowing the difference between what you have the right to do and what is right to do. And it's by Potter Stewart. Right? What is he saying? He's saying that ethics is something which helps you understand what is it that you have the right to do. You are allowed to do this. Right? But what is the right thing to do? What is the correct, morally, ethically correct thing to do, right? So it is a difference of what you have the power to do and what you should be doing, the idealism, the realism, and the idealism. Now, how to handle quotation questions? Begin by just explaining, trying to elaborate the meaning of the sentence. Then you tell me how the different dimensions can be thought of here. So this quote is about authority versus integrity, right? We have to check the misuse of power. We should have emotional intelligence to be able to decide, right, what the right thing to do is. And also emotional intelligence is required so that you're able to practice restraint on your own authority, on your own abilities. Then having the difference, knowing the difference between what to do, right, and what can be done, it is good for the society, right? You will do something which is good for everybody and not just something that you're allowed to do. Then you have to worry about your categorical imperative. Now, using such vocabulary, using such vocabulary in the ethics paper is rewarded. Why? Because you are actually talking about the core parts of ethical theory, right? So such things can be useful. So you tell me categorical imperative, it has merit because of its utilitarianism, right? According to utilitarianism theory, right? If it can be a benefit to more people, right? If it has utility, then it is the right thing to do. So that's why utilitarianism can help you identify what is the right thing to do. Beyond that, you can talk about how, where do you get these ethics from? What are the sources of these ethics, For example, you can tell me that, okay, family, education, religion, social conditioning, law, all of these can be sources of ethics. And from these elements, from these sources, from these teachings of ethics, here we can identify what is the right thing to do. Right? If you develop ethics, you can identify what the right thing to do can be. Right? The other thing can be, you can talk about the ambiguity of choice. Right? Sometimes the options that are there, they might not be clear enough, and sometimes the idea of choice itself might just be an illusion. So those sort of things are also identified by ethics. And in the end, you can conclude that, okay, this is a testament to the need of ethics in the real world. Right? So these are again some arguments that you could have made. If you've made something different, right, and it makes sense, still that is okay. All right. Now, the next quotation. If a country is to be made corruption free and become a nation of beautiful minds, I strongly feel that there are three societal members who can make a difference. They are father, mother, and teacher. APJ Abdul Kalam. So, what does this quote mean? It means that if you want a nation to be what? Free of corruption, to have beautiful minds, right? To have a nation of quality people, of good people, of ethical people, what is it required? What is required? What is required is that three social members can contribute to the moral upliftment of the country. These people are what? The father, the mother, and the teacher. Essentially, the core values, the places where your values are inculcated, the core of the value inculcation system. Right? So, how do you begin? You can begin with talking about corruption. Right, because we are saying we want a country free of corruption. So begin from there, that okay, what are the perils of corruption? Right, how do you attack the root cause of corruption? That root cause of corruption will be addressed by improving the moral fiber of the entire country. Right, so how do you do that? You have value inculcation. Does this value inculcation happen? It happens from an individual. Right, if the individual has good values, then the family will have good values, then the community will have good values. If all communities have good values, then the society has strong values. If all societies have strong values, then the entire country has good values. Fair enough. So, now getting to value inculcation, the first level of interaction is that with the family. What happens with the family? You learn core values. From your father and mother, you learn things like discipline, learn things like hard work, responsibility, love, compassion, right? Emotional intelligence, familial, this thing, longing, right? Looking after your siblings, everything you learn from your parents, right? You also understand what is the right thing to do. Your core, your initial exposure to ethics happens at home. Then sometimes some negative traits might also be picked up from the family. For example, casteism, right? Strict gender roles, that sort of thing can also be picked up from the family. So it is not just that these family members can make a positive difference, sometimes they can make a negative difference also. Right, so that's why the role of this familial institution is very, very critical. Then you talk about the teachers. It is not just knowledge but the process of education. The teacher not just teaches you certain subjects, but they'll also teach you how to learn, right? How to approach education. What are the things? What are the prioritization in your education that you should have? What is the methodology of studying? How do you essentially learn? Though that sort of thing is also taught by a teacher. Beyond that, they'll teach you ethics and behavior in a public space, right? The first interaction with society that a child will have, right, institutional interaction with society, is in the context of a school, right? Teacher also works as a guide and mentor to the students, right? So your ethical, your value inculcation also has an element of guide and mentorship, guidance and mentorship. Together together these three people, the father, the mother, and the teacher, right, they all contribute to nation building. So you can easily finish your 100-150 words, right, to be able to describe these quotations. Now, the third one is judge your success by what you had to give up in order to get it, the Dalai Lama. So here, you begin with defining what success means to you. Does it mean happiness? Does it mean financial security? Does it mean clearing the exam? Does it mean staying with your family? Does it mean eating good food? Whatever it is, you have to define what success is, right? And then you have to judge that success also. Is this what success actually means, right? So then in the body part, you can tell me that, okay, success is not necessarily, it is not always the same as happiness. It will not always give you fulfillment, because if the sacrifices outweigh the benefits, then you will not be a happy person. Then that is not true success. Now, what are the different sacrifices that can be made? I'll give you a list of some sacrifices that could come to you easily, right? If you thought something else, not an issue. But the idea is, among these dimensions, it is important that you have elaborated correctly, that you have given me examples. So, what are the sacrifices that could be made? You might sacrifice your time. You might not have personal time. You might sacrifice your health, right? You might sacrifice your morals, right? You might sacrifice your family time, your family priority, your family life in order to have success. Then you might have to give up your dignity if you're chasing success sometimes, right? Sometimes you might have to give up your self respect if you're chasing success, right? Then, from the ethical viewpoint, if your success goes against greater good, then it is not true success. If success goes against duty that you have to your family, to your society, to your country, to your people, then it is not a successful endeavor, right? If it goes against Gandhiji's talisman, then again that is not real success. And at the same time, if you have wealth without work, that is not success either. So, among all of these things, whatever arguments you would have wanted to make, well and good, just ensure that you give me strong examples. For example, maybe for health, somebody who's working in a coal mine, right? You might think of they might think of themselves to be what? Highly successful. But the problem is breathing in those coal fumes, right? The dust, it is going to give you bronchitis in the long run. It is going to ruin your health, right? So, what sort of success would it be that your work is leaving you riddled with disease? That sort of thing. Okay. Again, maybe for success, you have to move out of the country. You've gone so far away that you can never see your family again, right? Is that true success? Is that the way that you will fulfill your duties to your family, to your aging parents, that sort of thing? So, again, success has to be measured by what you have to give up in order to get it. All right, that is the true cost of success. Now, question 4. What do you understand by the term good governance? How far recent initiatives in terms of e-governance steps taken by the state have helped the beneficiaries? Discuss with suitable examples. So, what do you understand by good governance? Define. Right here, this one. Then introduction part. Then what do you have to do? How have recent initiatives helped the beneficiaries? Right. So, what are we saying? You tell me one element of good governance, and you tell me you tell me one element of e-governance, right? One element of e-governance, and tell me how it parallels, how it relates, how it is a parallel to an element of good governance. That's what they're saying, right? How has recent initiatives in e-governance helped the beneficiaries? How is e-governance helping the people, right? So you give me elements of e-governance. What are they? Publicly available websites for all, right? What does that do? It enables impartiality and inclusivity, right? Procedures, laws, regulations are all embedded in the system, so it promotes rule of law, right? Data availability or access to reports enables what? Transparency and accountability. Grievance redressal mechanism creates compassionate and just public service, right? What else? Displaying the charter and deliverables, right? Clearly delineating the standards of service that can be expected, right? That does what? It creates a participatory, democratic and responsible public service, right? So here I want you to give examples also, right? One example of each of these, and only then will you get good marks for this question. Okay, but again, the line of thought would be something like this. The next question is online methodology. This is question 4 part B. Online methodology is being used for day-to-day meetings, institutional approvals in the administration, and for teaching and learning in education sector to the extent telemedicine in the health sector is getting popular with the approvals of competent authority. So what are they saying? That online methodology is infiltrating our regular world. Beyond education, we also have digital medicine, which is taking prominence, right? No doubt it has advantages and disadvantages for both beneficiaries and the system at large. Describe and discuss the ethical issues involved in the use of online method, particularly in the vulnerable section of the society. So what do you have to answer? Do you have to tell the advantages and disadvantages also? If you can do it in half a page, only then. The problem with this question is that they're asking you a lot of things. They have asked you that this thing online methodology is used in different places, so you have to give me an introduction about that, right? Only on online education, telemedicine, this sort of thing you have to define. Then it has benefits and disadvantages to both beneficiaries and the societies. You can or you may not give me a short description of the advantages and disadvantages. If you can summarize in very short, it will be value addition, right? Then core demand of the question is what? Describe and discuss ethical issues. What are the ethical issues? Exclusion of a vast majority. Why? Mobiles remain expensive, right? There is a digital divide in our country. So that is the first ethical issue that is there with the online methodology. The second thing is that this digital divide is getting state supported because of the push to digital India, right? Then there is inequity that is involved. How? There is generational deprivation of the skills of being able to run these devices. For example, if in your family, your parents, your grandparents had these devices, had online access, right? So then you would be better geared to be exposed to these devices from a young age, right? And you would be better exposed, better geared, better skilled at using these devices, as compared to somebody in a vulnerable position who has never been exposed to this system at all, right? Their competencies will suffer, and that by that angle, by that logic, because of that differential in their capabilities, right, the amount and type of service that they get, right, the amount and type of benefits that they can get from online methodology, that will also change. What else? These pre-existing competencies again create another digital divide. What is the next thing? The next thing is the mainstreaming of edutech and medical technology. Why? Because these are both sectors of altruistic objectives. They have nation building capabilities, they have welfare objectives. But mainstreaming of these organizations, mainstreaming of these sectors, what does that create? That creates a compliance of what? Profit motive, right? They are sold through agents, they are sold through sold as sales targets, right? There is no real quality control that can be affected. Quality control will get what? Affected, detrimentally affected, right? There will be adverse impact on the quality control if medical technology and educational technology continue unabated, right? What else? Poor grievance redressal mechanism because of lack of personal touch. Then gadget fascination will increase in the youth, for example, because there is so much online methodology, it becomes more important for you to have a flagship expensive designer phone, right? Then it also creates a new avenue for class barriers. Again, as many examples as possible, it would be good for us to write here. Then how do you end? You can give me a way forward, and this also counts as an optional, right? It also counts as a value addition, that okay, all of these issues are there, but then what are you going to do? Are you going to let it stay? Are we going to keep running the system with the same problems, or do we have to do something to mitigate these issues? Do we have to do something that we are able to negate these negatives and only have the positives that are there? Okay, you end with that thought. The next, so this particular question is an example why your test series can be very important. So this is the sort of topic that a lot of students might miss in their preparation, right? You might not study the ethics of war in a conventional uh, notes type of format, right? It might not be there in the common notes, common material that is there. But because of this year's events, because of this year's chain of events that happened, right? Current affairs that happened. There was a war going on, right? In the forum tests, right, we did have a question about ethics of war. And if you would have even revised that question, this particular question you would be able to write in an above average quality. That means you would get above average marks, exceptional marks in a question that is well prepared in advance. All right. So for the students who are going to write mains next year, please remember that you have to pay focus on your test series, use these solution booklets, right? Use these test series as a separate source. Always revise the questions that you're attempting. Now, anyhow, moving to the question, Russia and Ukraine war has been going on for the last 7 months. Different countries have taken independent stands and actions in view of their own national interests. We are all aware that war has its own impact on different aspects of the society, including human tragedy. What are the ethical issues that are crucial to be considered while launching into war and the continuation? Illustrate with justification the ethical issues involved in the given state of affairs. So, you have to tell me what the moral principles of war are. Okay, so you introduce the question by describing the ethics of war, right? So what is war? War is armed conflict, right? It is immoral because there is human tragedy involved. Why? Because it inflicts pain, it inflicts loss of life on people. But sometimes it is morally permissible and obligatory, right? What are these moral principles? The moral principles of war: jus ad bellum, jus in bello, and jus post bellum. What are the moral principles you have to remember before you launch into war? What are the principles that you have to follow during war? And what are the principles you have to follow after the war has ended? Subparts are what? Before the war, you have to ensure that you're fighting for a just cause, right? That you're fighting with the right intention, that you're fighting with the proper authority, and you're fighting as a last resort, right? This sort of thing is what are the moral principles of war before the war has taken place. Then during war, there should be no disproportionate use of power. The idea is, if somebody sends in a foot soldier to attack you, you don't drop a missile on them, right? Your idea is to respond with the same proportion of power that is the aggregator, the aggressor, that the aggressor is hitting you with. Then what is the ethics after war? What are the principles after war? Just post bellum, you end with the right intention. It has to be declared publicly that the war has ended, right? And you have to treat the defeated party with respect. These are the essential principles of having ethical war. Now, despite all of these issues, despite these things, what is the justification, right, of the given state of affair? Why do we have to continue and keep this war running? So, war can be ethically justified in certain cases. Why? If it is upholding morality, right? If the war is in defense, right? If it is for self-preservation purposes, if it is the last resort in conflict resolution, nothing can be done. War is inevitable. Then, if it is as a preemptive strike, you know that the enemy is coming and it's going to attack on you, then you could instead, then initiating war is okay, right? Then if the cost of not fighting the war is more than the cost of fighting the war, and we're not talking about the economic cost here, right? If the moral cost, if the social cost, if the national cost of not fighting a war is larger than the cost of actually fighting the war, then that war should be fought, right? So these are the reasons how war can be ethically justified. Again, strong examples for everything wherever possible, right? And what is the conclusion? That a just war is important, right? Mahabharata teaches us about that, right? We have to remember about our dharma, we have to remember about our duty. All of these things are important. Value additions here are also possible. You could have talked about the Geneva Convention, you could have talked about the UN Charter. If you want to link it to World War One, World War Two, that also would be a strong sense of value addition here. All right. Now, the next type of question was again new. You were required to write short notes in 30 words each. 30 words is essentially 4 sentences, nothing more than that, right? If you're writing a sentence of, I don't know, 8 words, right? So that means 30 words means what? 4 sentences. So for 4 sentences, you can only give me 4 different thoughts. So that's why I'm summarizing everything on one page. Um, Short note on constitutional morality. What is constitutional morality? You give me an explanation in one sentence. Talk about the letter and spirit of the law, right? What is the difference between law and ethics? You can tell me about the greater good that is affected with constitutional morality and how interpretation is one key tenet of constitutional morality. Again, pick something out of this and write within word limit. Then, conflict of interest. About conflict of interest, it is a truth of life, right? You cannot have a stable and smooth life. There will be at least one instance in which you will have to have a conflict of your interests, right? In complex situations it becomes more difficult. In public life it has larger implications on society, right? There is the principle of reclusion, that if there is a conflict of interest, if possible you have to excuse yourself from the situation, remove yourself from the situation, so that conflict of interest is abated, right? And then what is the objective here? The objective remains your greater good, your duty, and your conscience. Fair enough. Then, probity in public life. You can give me the meaning of probity, right? You can tell me how honesty and integrity and transparency all come together to create the idea of probity, right? You tell me about the utility of probity in the world, right? How it affects good governance. This sort of thing you can tell me for probity, right? Then challenges of digitization. Tell me what digitization is, right? And then move on to challenges directly. Tell me that it creates a digital divide. We do not have equity. We do have dependency on improper infrastructure and devices. And at the same time, conclude on a positive. Digitalization is still important. It is still the fact and reality of our present time. All right. Then devotion to duty, meaning what is your duty and why are you supposed to be devoted to it, right? What is dharma? What is your duty, right? What is self motivation? Why do you have to be devoted on your own? What is that and how is it different from motivation? Your conscience tells you to be devoted to your duty. What is your categorical imperative? What is your deontological outcome, right? That sort of thing you could have written here. Question 6. Whistleblower who reports corruption and illegal activities. A whistleblower who reports corruption and illegal activities, wrongdoing, and misconduct to the concerned authorities runs the risk of being exposed to grave danger, physical harm, and victimization by vested interests. Right? Vested interests, comma, accused persons and his team. What policy measures would you suggest to strengthen protection mechanism to safeguard the whistleblower? So two clear parts. This is part 2. What are the mechanisms? And part 1 is that whistleblowers get into trouble. Right? In the introduction, you can give me what whistleblowing is. You can explain that. Right? But that has already been done in the question. Right? So one key way of trying to introduce this question can be directly from value addition. Do you have an example of a strong, of a famous whistleblower, right, that you can start with? For example, if you can talk about IES Satyendra Dubey, can you talk about Snowden, right? Whatever example you think of, it is a strong way to begin this question. So what are the threats to whistleblowers? You can this thing you can summarize these threats along the lines of the question also. Grave danger, physical harm, and victimization. You can use that, or you can just give me certain arguments that come to your mind. So one option can be it puts yourself at risk, your family at risk of retribution, of revenge from these people against whom you are blowing the whistle. Then it puts society above your self interest, so that's why naturally your self interest can be harmed, right? Then it puts you at financial risk. You might lose your job, you might lose your assets, you might lose the value of those assets by whistleblowing. Then there is also the risk of social exclusion. So it's not just economic, it has socio-economic impact, right? then then what are the measures to protect whistleblowers, right? You have the anonymity principle, right? You have to have transparency, you have to have clear record keeping, you have to have better security protocols, you can have a system similar to witness protection, you can strengthen lokpal, that sort of institution for public organizations, and for private organizations we can strengthen what? Corporate law, right? So again, These are quite generalistic points that you can create more specificity by giving examples. Okay, so that is how you answer this question. The next question reads, in the contemporary world, corporate sector's contribution in generating wealth and employment is increasing. Fair enough. Basically, they're saying capitalism is working. In doing so, they're bringing in unprecedented onslaught on the climate, environmental sustainability, and living conditions of human beings. In this background, do you find that social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, is efficient and sufficient enough to fulfill the social roles and responsibilities needed in the corporate world for which the CSR is mandated? Critically examine. Again, a very long question. Essentially, reading the question itself becomes something of an exercise in reading comprehension. All right. So, how do you introduce? You introduce by telling me, okay, what is CSR, right? If you remember, value addition can be section 135 of the Companies Act. Then, the effectiveness of CSR, you give me first paragraph, and then you tell me the failures of corporate social responsibility also. Here again, examples are good. For climate, talk about water neutrality by beverage companies. For example, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, they say these things that whatever water we extract from the environment, we do reclaim and put back. All right. Sustainability. In terms of sustainability, we can talk about the packaging that is there, the sourcing of raw material that is there, the sourcing of the recycling of the waste material that is produced. All of that counts under sustainability. Living conditions of human beings, talk about how companies are working to reduce pollution, how they're working to improve the ecological habitat, that sort of thing. Okay. But then what are the failures? The CSR's failures will be what? Selfish interests of the organizations. For example, companies might use CSR activities in their marketing campaigns, right? Then there is conditionality. For example, they're only doing CSR activities from where there can be some other benefit to them. For example, appeasement of the local this thing, villages near the factory, right? So that those people do not revolt against the factory, so the organization will create some sort of corporate social responsibility activity in and around that particular factory. Then there can also be failure of aid. The intention might be correct, the objective might be noble, but the benefits of the corporate social responsibility activity might accrue to only a select group of people and essentially disregard the major chunk of the population. Okay, then you tell me all of these things, and then what is the conclusion going to be? The conclusion is going to be that, okay, public welfare is the common duty of all social institutions, right? So that's why these things should be done. And Gandhiji's seven sins are, among the Gandhiji's seven sins, we also have commerce without morality. All right. Now, the next part is going to be the case studies, and before that, we need a short break. Okay. So that is it for part A. All right. In 5 minutes, we'll begin the case study also. Right. The idea about case studies I'll give you that, okay, the way of answering this paper is also a little bit different. Focus on these two parts have to be different. All right. So let's take a break and then we'll start the case studies. All right, now let's get to the case studies part of our GS paper. The thing about the case studies part of the paper is that the ability to be able to read these cases in the least amount of time possible, and to do active reading and not just passive reading in which you're not taking in the meaning. So the idea is that you have to partake in active reading of these cases. And for this particular paper this year, our case studies were essentially quite long, right? These the length of the passage was quite much, right? So that again created some challenge for the students. Normal strategies include a lot of students prefer to write their case studies first, so that they're able to expend their reading ability in the beginning because their focus is slightly better. But in this particular pattern, in this particular paper this year, the theory paper also was quite lengthy. The questions themselves were quite lengthy. So essentially what you have to develop, for those of my students who are preparing for the future exams, uh, the thing that you would want to develop is to be able to read quickly and pick up the meaning, right? So when you're reading the case study in the exam situation, what I would want you to do is, I want you to underline, I want you to mark, I want you to be hungry for the content that is to be generated. Now, first, before we start reading the case itself, let's look at what is being asked. We have to discuss the ethical issues that are involved in the case. This is question 7. So we have to look at the ethical issues involved in the case, right? Then we have to critically examine the options available to somebody called Prabhat in the above situation, and which of the above would be the most appropriate for Prabhat and why, right? So one person Prabhat, and we have to figure out what the options are there for him, right? And what is the best course of action he could take. Now let us read the case study. So Prabhat was working as a vice president of marketing at Sterling Electric Limited, right? And it's a reputed multinational company. So this guy was working in an electric company. But presently, the company was passing through difficult times as the sales were continuously showing a downward trend in the last 2 quarters. For the last 6 months, right, what has happened is that the sales were continuously following. His division, which till now had been a major revenue contributor to the country's financial health, was now desperately trying to procure some big government order for them. So his Prabhat's the department, right, his division, it was essentially money making, but now it's not, and they're scrambling to get an order, right? But their best efforts did not yield a positive success or breakthrough. So basically, they're facing failure. Then this his was a professional company, and his local bosses were under pressure from the London based head office to show some positive results. Then, in the last performance review meeting taken by the executive director, India head, he was reprimanded for his poor performance, right? So his bosses are telling him that, you're not performing well, and he was scolded for that bad performance. Then he assured them that his division was working on a special contract from the Ministry of Defense for a secret installation near Gwalior. All right, and the tender is being submitted shortly. So they're looking for a secret installation, and they're trying to get a tender there. This is what Prabhat has communicated and committed to his bosses. Then he was under extreme pressure and he was deeply perturbed, right? While aggravating the situation further, what aggravated the situation further was a warning from the top that if the deal was not clinched, it would, in favor of the company, the division might have to be closed and he might lose his lucrative job. So, Prabhat, if he is not successful in getting this order, this tender, he will lose his job. Then there was another dimension which was causing him deep mental torture and agony. This pertained to his personal precarious financial health. What has happened? He was a single father, a single earner in the family with two regular school going, thank you, school going children, and his old ailing mother, right? Then the heavy expenditure on education and medicine, right, was causing a big strain in his monthly pay packet. So he had large financial burdens on him. That sort of thing was there. Regular EMI for housing loan taken from the bank was unavoidable, and any default would render him liable for severe legal action, right? So if he defaults on his EMI, then that would create legal action against him. Then uh, In the above backdrop, he was hoping for some miracle to happen. There was a sudden turn of events. His secretary informed that a gentleman, Subhash Verma, wanted to see him, and as he was interested in the position of manager, which was to be filled in by him in the company. What is he saying? His secretary told him that some person has come to fill in the position of manager, right? He further brought to his notice that his CV had been received through the office of the Minister of Defense. Okay. During the interview of the candidate, Subhash Verma, he found him technically sound. So Prabhat finds this candidate technically sound, well educated, right, with the skills that he needed, resourceful and an experienced marketeer, right. He seemed to be well conversant with the uh, tendering procedures and having a knack of follow up and liaising in this regard. So he was a well skilled individual with the uh, important proficiencies which were required for this job. Then Prabhat felt that he was a better choice than the rest of the candidates who were recently interviewed by him in the last few days. Then Subhash Verma also indicated that he was in the possession of the copies of the bid document that Unique Electronics Limited would be submitting the next day to the Defense Ministry for their tender. So this person, this Subhash Verma, this candidate who was there, he has secret documents, the tender documents, which will be furnished tomorrow in the next day by a rival company, right. He offered to hand over those documents subject to his employment in the company on suitable terms and conditions. So he said, you give me this job and I'll give you this information. He made clear that in the process, Sterling Electric Limited could outbid their rival company and get the bid and hefty Defense Ministry order. He indicated that it was a win win situation for both him and the company. He says that it will solve all of your problems. You can go make this tender, you can go make this bid and win the tender. Prabhat was absolutely stunned. It was a mixed feeling of shock and thrill. He was uncomfortable and perspiring. If accepted, all of his problems would vanish instantly, and he may be rewarded for securing the much awaited tender and thereby boosting company sales and financial health. He was in a fix to the future course of action. He was wonderstruck at the guts of Subhash Verma in having surreptitiously removing his own company papers and offering the rival company a course of action. And offering it to the rival company for a job. Being an experienced person, he was examining the pros and cons of the proposal of the situation, and he asked him to come the next day. So the first thing that he did was Prabhat told Subhash Verma to come in the next day. Now, what are the ethical issues involved here? The ethical issues involved here can be written as follows. So the way that we are giving you the solution for the case studies again is that we'll give you the arguments, but the elaboration is up to you, right? And with each case study, you should be able to pick up one intricacy, one subtlety of how you should try and answer these questions. Okay. So what are the ethical issues involved here? And you're required to discuss. So please remember that we would want you to give some elaboration. Now, from the viewpoint of Prabhat, what are the ethical issues that are there? He's committing corporate fraud if he's taking these documents, right? He might be hiring an employee with compromised ethics. If Subhash can steal from his earlier company, he can steal information from the current company also. Having such a person in the organization is a big risk to take. So that is an ethical issue. And then he's also participating in unfair competition, right? He's breaking the rules of fair competition on which the process of tender is based. Then Prabhat is compromising his own personal and professional integrity to validate these things. To validate these arguments, it is also preferable that you pick up information from the case itself. For example, Prabhat is compromising his own personal and professional integrity. His body is reacting against it, right? He was uncomfortable and perspiring, right? He was absolutely stunned. So that means that his inner voice was going against the temptation of doing something wrong. Then it also shows Prabhat's inability to handle pressure. Just because his boss is telling me that you might lose your job if you don't get your work done, that does not mean that he takes a negative recourse, another unethical recourse. All right. Then he also has moral and ethical duties, right? He has responsibilities on his shoulders as a son to care for his mother, as a father to provide for his children, right? As a competent citizen, he also has financial duty to pay his loans back in time. So all of those things I would want you to explain here. Then, from the viewpoint of Subhash, right? Uh, yeah, from the viewpoint of Subhash, what are the ethical issues, right? His CV was received by the ministry, right? There is a uh, information that is attached that, it is received through the office of the Minister of Defense. So that means this might be a push for a nepotistic hiring, right? He's also securing a job through unfair means, even though he has the required competency. Had he not indulged in such behavior, even then he could have easily gotten the job, right? Because his skill set was better than the rest of the candidates. So then why is he taking this unethical recourse, right? What else are the issues for the company itself? The company, this thing, Sterling Electric, is putting their profit motive over ethics. Why? Because they're pushing their employees to run after targets, and that is making their employees consider unethical behavior also, right? They're also putting undue pressure on an employee. They're giving threats that if you do not do this job, we might have to close your division, we might have to end your association with the organization. Next part of the question is, critically examine the options available to Prabhat in the above situation. When you're asked to critically examine, I want you to give me the merits and demerits of each point of action, right? So what can he do? He can hire Subhash, right? The merit would be he would get access to the information. He can have the financial issues can get resolved. He can look after his parents, he can look after his children, he can pay his EMIs on time, he can appease his boss, right? He can appease the head office from the London head office, the bosses there. That sort of thing will all be merits of hiring Subhash. Demerits is going to be what? That he will lose out on his integrity, personal professional integrity, right? He will hire an employee with compromised ethics. Again, you'll have to repeat the same arguments that are here, right? Then what can he do? The other option can be he does not hire Subhash, he hires somebody else, right? What are the merits? That his integrity will be protected. He will not have to worry about having a person with compromised ethics in the organization, right? He will not be partaking in unfair competition, that sort of thing, right? But the demerits are what? His personal interests will be unmet. Then what can he do? He can also hire Subhash but ignore the documents. What is the merit here? He'll get a good employee, albeit with bad ethics, but he will have a good employee with good credentials, right? So he might be able to have better sales performance in the long run. And the demerits will be what? Again, that he has somebody who is capable of doing unethical behavior in the organization. He would have done a nepotistic hiring either way. That sort of thing will still continue, and so on and so forth. Whatever analysis you can come up with, as long as it is logically sound, it will be acceptable to the examiner. The next thing that was asked was, what is the most appropriate action? The most appropriate action is that he should not hire Subhash, right? What are the reasons? Prabhat will not compromise his personal ethics. Hiring Subhash will also mean that he will compromise his professional integrity, right? He should do Nishkam Karma. He should partake in Nishkam Karma without worrying about his desire for family's benefit, right? He's gaining monetary benefit in a way which is Gandhiji's sin of wealth without work, right? Because he's breaking the rules of competition. What should he do? He should also submit an honest bid to the best of his ability, right? He should be confident in his professional competency also. Even if he loses this job, he should have the understanding, he should have the confidence that with the experience that he has gained in this organization, he will be able to find another job and look after his family, right? And then all of these arguments you support with strong ethical vocabulary. All right. Now, beyond this, beyond this core requirement, if you have given certain other elements to this question, facts of the case, right? If you've given some quotations, if you've given contemporary relevance, or you've identified the stakeholders, depending upon the quality of this extra material that you're giving, it will count as value addition also, right? If you had the time and you've written something extra, it does contribute to a better impression in the exam. All right. So that was question 7. Now, Let's worry about question 8. Okay, so Ramesh is a state civil services officer. Hmm. Ramesh is a state civil services officer who got the opportunity of getting posted to the capital of a border state. First, let's look at what the questions were. Even if you start reading the case, you have to quickly remember that let us look what the questions are going to be. They're asking what the options are available to Ramesh as the director of the Home Department of the bordering state. Right? What are the options in the crisis? Then, what is the option that he should adopt and why? Critically evaluate each of these options. Right? What are the ethical dilemmas that are being faced? And what are the policy measures that should be suggested to combat the menace of infiltration along the neighboring country? Now let us read. So what they're doing is you have to remember that in these 4 pages you have to answer 5 subparts of the question. So giving extra items here, giving extra paragraphs here will become difficult for you because you might run out of space to answer the questions themselves. Now, Ramesh is a state civil services officer who has got the opportunity of getting posted to the capital of a border state after meandering after tendering 20 years of service. Ramesh's mother has recently been detected cancer and has been admitted to the leading cancer hospital in the city. His 2 adolescent children have also got admission in one of the best public schools of the town. After setting down in his appointment as director in the home department of the state, Ramesh got a confidential report through intelligence sources that illegal migrants are infiltrating in the state from the neighboring country. He decided to personally carry out a surprise check of the border post along with his home department team. To his surprise, he caught red handed 2 families of 12 members infiltrated with the connivance of the security personnel at the border posts. On further inquiry, and investigation, it was found that after the migrants from neighboring country infiltrate, that documentation like Aadhaar card and ration card or voter card are also forged, and they are also made to settle down in a particular area of the state. Right? So all of this infiltration is happening with the collusion of the officers. However, he has been summoned. Uh, no, however, he has summoned by the additional Home Secretary after a week. Wait. Uh, okay. Ration card are forced to settle down. Ramesh prepared the detailed and comprehensive report and submitted it to the additional secretary of the state. So he made a report and he told his boss. Then, however, he has been summoned by the additional home secretary after a week and was instructed to withdraw the report. The additional home secretary informed Ramesh that the report submitted by him had not been appreciated by the higher authorities. He further cautioned him that if he fails to withdraw this confidential report, he will not only be posted out from the prestigious appointment from the state capital, but his further promotion, which is due in the near future, will also get in jeopardy. So basically, this officer who was getting a new post in a nice, cushy place, what has happened is that there was some uh, corruption activity that was happening, infiltration happening because of collusive corruption. He made a report, but now his boss is putting pressure on him to withdraw this report, or else his cushy position, his good posting will be lost. Now, what are the options available to him? One, two, three. The first option is to listen to his additional secretary and withdraw his report. Remember that the question is asking you to list the options separately, then select the option separately, and then evaluate the option again separately. Right? So you have to plan out your answer to the best of your ability. The options that are available to Ramesh are what? That he can listen to his additional secretary and withdraw his report. He cannot withdraw the report, right? He does not withdraw the report and accepts whatever consequences befall on him. The third thing he can do is he does not withdraw the report, but he takes additional steps to protect himself. How? He adds the details of the threat by the additional secretary to this report. Then he involves the local media or the social media to bring public focus into this issue. Then he uses the support of NGOs, these non-government organizations, to create more pressure on these uh, functionaries. He goes to the superior of the additional secretary or the CM to what? To report the misconduct of his direct superior, right? Then he can also take legal recourse for the problem of document forgery, which is an actual crime, right? These are the things that he can do. Now, what is the path that he can adopt? You can refer to these subparts here and tell what are the reasons for which this thing could be done. For example, he can add details. No, he does not withdraw the report and takes additional steps. Right? What does that do? It enables his personal professional integrity to be safe. Right? He can deliver public service. He follows the deontological principle, the utilitarian principle. He can add the details of the threat to the report. And what does that do? It will enable further transparency, and he can be a whistleblower. Then he can involve local media, social media, and that will create what? Public support and exert political pressure. And then he can go to the chief minister also. Right? The support of the NGOs can offer extra institutional support out of the institution, out of the organization. There he won't be bound. These people will not be bound by organizational restrictions. Then he can go to the additional secretary's superior or the chief minister, and then what? Report his misconduct. Then he can have legal recourse, right? Why? Because he has to follow the legal and constitutional mandate, and then he should also have clear record keeping. Fair enough. Now, the next demand of the question was evaluate each of these options. Option 1, listen and withdraw the report, is essentially unethical because it's going against personal and professional ethics, right? It shows poor crisis management. It shows that you are unable to handle pressure, right? It also disregards public duty. It disregards public dharma, that sort of thing. That is why it is not good. The only merit will be that it will save his position, it will save his posting in this nice capital city. The second option is what? It is doing the right thing, but it is too idealistic, right? It shows a lack of pragmatism or practicality, right? It shows low problem solving ability, right? You're just taking the consequences. But the good thing is it follows the principle of Nishkam Karma, that you do your work and not worry about the consequences. Then the third option is what? It will be effective change through direct action. How do you do that? What you're doing is that you're creating the risks that are associated with this is that you can go to the superior, but there can be negative backlash, right? You can have repercussions from your direct additional secretary as soon as you try to do these things, right? If you go to the media and there is no public interest, then again that part of your plan will fail. What are the benefits? That it has the potential to bring about change. It protects the life of Ramesh, right? It protects Ramesh from the negative externalities of his actions, right? It protects his conscience also, and it also supports greater good. So that's how you could analyze the options. Then, what are the dilemmas that he's facing? Please remember, dilemmas also always have to be direct oppositions, right? One thing has to be opposite to the other. Only then will it be a dilemma. The idea is that the road diverged in a yellow wood, right? So you don't know whether you want to go left or right, and you have to pick one option among the two. All right. Now, what are the dilemmas that Ramesh was facing? Public service versus personal life, personal versus professional ethics, public welfare or interest versus personal welfare or interest, dedication to work versus commitment to family, integrity versus family's personal well-being, nishkam karma versus desire for a better future, for better growth of the family. Now, you can just give me these dilemmas, but a good practice is to describe each phase, describe each option with some fact from the case, right? There is public service mandate, there can be personal life. You give me a small elaboration of what that means. Okay, so that's how you could handle this question. Moving on to question 9. What have they asked? Essentially, they have asked the same thing again. What are the options available to Ashok? Right? Evaluate or examine each of the options that are available, identified by Ashok. Right? What are the ethical dilemmas being faced by this person? Which option do you think is the most appropriate to use? And in the above scenario, what type of training do you suggest to police officers, right, in such districts where stone mining illegal activities are rampant? Right? So here again, they're asking 5 questions. What is the case? The Supreme Court has banned mining in the Aravalli Hills to stop the degradation of the forest cover and to maintain the ecological balance. However, the stone mining was still prevalent in the border district of the affected state with the connivance of certain corrupt forest officials and politicians. Young and dynamic SP, who was recently posted in the affected district, promised himself to stop this menace. In one of his surprise checks with the team, he found a loaded truck with stone trying to escape the mining area. He tried to stop the truck, but the truck driver overrun the police officer, killing him on the spot, and thereafter managed to flee. Police filed FIR, but no breakthrough was achieved, right, in the case for almost 3 months. Ashok, who was the investigative journalist working for a leading TV channel, suo moto started investigating the officials, right, investigating the case. Within 1 month, Ashok got a breakthrough by interacting with local people, stone mining mafia, and government officials. He prepared his investigative story and presented to the CMD of the TV channel. He exposed in his investigative report the complete nexus of the stone mafia, working with the blessing of the corrupt police and civil officials and politicians. The politician who was involved in the mafia was no one else but a local MLA who was considered to be very close to the chief minister. After going through the investigative report, the CMD advised Ashok to drop the idea of making the story published through electronic media. He informed that the local MLA was not only a relative of the owner of the TV channel but also had unofficially 20% of stake in the channel. The CMD further informed Ashok that his further promotion and hike in pay will be taken care of. In addition, the soft loan of 10 lakhs which he has taken from the TV channel for his son's chronic disease will be suitably adjusted if he hands over the investigative report to him. So what is happening? This person Ashok, who investigated a case, he is being stopped from bringing these facts to light. Now, part A. What are the options available to Ashok? Essentially three. He can either listen to the CMD, right, and drop the report. He can continue reporting and not worry about the consequences, or he can publish anonymously on social media. Or what can he do? Maybe he can publish, he can do Nishkam Karm, but take protective steps, right? So, whatever arguments you can think of, you can quote here. Now, the first part was just to mention and enlist the different options that are available. Beyond that, now we have to critically analyze the options. Instead of giving you a critical analysis for all of these topics, all of these options, I will give you the different dimensions on which you can check these options. They are what? Ashok might be failing his personal integrity if he listens to the CMD, right? He will become a party to collusive corruption, right? He will be violating his journalistic integrity. He will negate the justice to a martyred officer, right? It will go against his conscience. Now, these points will be what? The demerits of this problem, of this option, but they will be the merits of doing Nishkam Karma, that he will not be doing this. So essentially, there will be a dichotomy. This is either happening or this is either not happening. Essentially, the points will remain the same, right? What are the good things that can happen to him? The loan, promotion, salary increment thing can happen, right? His personal safety can get improved, and his professional security of job can get affected, right? Again, they will get interchanged for the next option, right? Then, what are the ethical dilemmas that he's facing? Duty versus comfort, journalistic integrity versus pressure, right? Justice versus self preservation. The sin of knowledge without character will be affected if he refuses to publish the report. Then, what is the appropriate course? That he can publish anonymously on social media, or he can publish and take protective steps. And he should also seek the support of the SP who has recently joined, right? The person who had started the entire story, right? And he should also look for alternative employment in the meantime, because it is an expected outcome that his current employment might end because of his actions, right? Then, what are the trainings that you suggest to officers here? Because because somebody's life was lost in pursuit of a criminal, there should be a combat refresher training, right? There should be training on how to capture an absconding criminal. That sort of skill set can be augmented. It is not to say that these officers do not possess their skills. It is only that these skills can be practiced and improved. Right. After that, they can have a refresher course on investigation, right, on fact finding missions, so that they are not completely dependent, so that the case does not stay stagnated for months on end and wait for a journalist to do the investigative work. Because the entire issue is about mining, stone mining in the Aravali region, then some environmental awareness training would also feel opportune. Beyond that, being able to cooperate with the media, right, and carry out investigation with them is also some sort of training which can help, right? Moving on to the next case. Now, this is question 10. You have done an MBA. Before you've done an MBA, let's see the questions. Under the given conditions, what are the options available to you as a member of the inspecting team? Critically evaluate each of the options listed by you. What option would you adopt and why? What are the ethical dilemmas being faced by you? And what are the consequences of overlooking the observations raised by the inspecting team? Same as the last question, only the last part will be slightly different. So you've done your MBA from a reputed institution 3 years back, but could not get campus placement due to COVID-19 generated recession. However, after a lot of persuasion and a series of competitive tests, including written and interview, you managed to get a job in a leading shoe company. You have aged parents who are dependent and staying with you. You also recently got married, and after getting this decent job, you were allotted the inspection section, which is responsible for clearing the final product. In the first year, you learned your job well and was appreciated for your performance by the and you were appreciated for your performance by the management. The company is doing good business for the last 5 years in domestic market, and this year it is decided to even export to Europe and some Gulf countries. However, one large consignment to Europe was rejected uh, by their inspecting team due to certain poor quality issues and was sent back. The top management ordered that the consignment to be cleared for the domestic market. As part of the inspecting team, you observed the glaring poor quality of the product and brought it to the knowledge of the team commander. However, the top management advised all the members of the team to overlook these defects, as the management cannot bear such a huge loss. Rest of the team members except you promptly signed and cleared the consignment for domestic market, overlooking the glaring defects. You again brought to the knowledge of the team commander that such consignment, if cleared even for the domestic market, will tarnish the image and reputation of the company and will be counterproductive in the long run. However, you were further advised by the top manager that if you do not clear the consignment, the company will not hesitate to terminate your services, citing certain innocuous reasons. So, what are the options here? Essentially, there are only two options. Either you overlook the defects, or you do not overlook and flag the violation, right? There is no magic option C here. Now, these options you analyze that, okay, what is the merit, demerit, you give me that sort of analysis. Simple enough. Then, what are the mechanisms to boost the compliance, right? No, the next thing is what is the option that you would evaluate and why? The option that you would evaluate is what? The option, I think this is the wrong slide. The option that you're going to select is what? That you're going to flag the violation, because you have to protect your personal integrity, you have to protect your professional integrity, you have to ensure that you're doing your job well. It can create health issues, it can lead to the poor licensing of the losing of the license of the manufacturing company. Okay, then what are the ethical dilemmas being faced by you? The ethical dilemmas you're facing are what? Profit versus trust, right? Long term profit versus short term profit, right? International quality control versus international quality control versus national quality control, customer safety versus again profit, right? Company's reputation versus short term loss, right? So again, these are the dilemmas that can be faced by you. Again, you can elaborate, you can give different dilemmas according to your perception. Further, what are the consequences of overlooking these defects? It can be detrimental to the health of the customer. There can be damage to the brand value. There can be loss of market share because of the poor quality of product. There can be loss of the company's manufacturing license, right? There can be loss of his integrity, personal professional integrity. There can be commerce without morality, right? Again, Gandhiji's sin. Then there will be poor corporate ethics, and then in the long run it can also hamper his professional, this thing, uh, competence, right? His image, his ability, his future prospects, his career can also get affected, because he would then become a person who has partaken in such a activity. So finding a new job again can become difficult for this person, right? So that sort of thing you can do. Again, you would want or might want to add in certain other elements for value addition. Moving on to question 11. What are the options questions here? What are the options available to Rakesh? Critically examine each of the options, ethical dilemmas, and course of action. Right? Fairly straightforward. What has happened is this: Rakesh was working as a joint commissioner in the transport department of a city. As part of his job profile, among others, he was entrusted with the task of overseeing the control and functioning of a city transport department. A case of strike by the drivers' union. Of the city transport department over the issue of compensation to a driver who died on duty while driving a bus came up before him for his decision in the matter. He gathered that the driver, who is now deceased, was plying bus number 528, which passed through a busy and congested road of the city. It said, it so happened, it so happened that there was an altercation between the driver and a car driver. It so happened that near an intersection on the way, there was an accident involving the bus and a car driven by a middle aged man. It was found that there was a altercation between the driver and the car driver. Heated arguments between them led to a fight, and the driver gave him a blow. A lot of passerbys had gathered and tried to intervene, but without success. Eventually, both of them were badly injured and profusely bleeding, and were taken to a nearby hospital. The driver succumbed to the injuries, and could not be saved. The middle-aged driver's condition was also critical, but after a day he recovered and he was discharged. Police has immediately come to the spot. Police had immediately come to the spot of the accident, and the FIR was registered. Police investigation revealed that the quarrel in question was started by the bus driver, and he had resorted to physical violence. There was an exchange of blows between them. The city transport department management is considering not giving any extra compensation to the driver's family, the deceased driver's family. The family is very aggrieved, depressed, and agitated against the discriminatory and non sympathetic approach of the city transport department's management. The bus driver, deceased, was 52 years of age, was survived by his wife and two college going daughters. He was the sole earner of the family. The city transport department workers union took up this case, and when found no favorable response from the management, decided to go on strike. The union's demand was twofold. First was full extra compensation to be given to other drivers who died on duty, as given to other drivers who died on duty, and second, employment to one family member. The strike has continued for 10 days and the deadlock remains. Now, what are the options available? The options available can be Ram- Rakesh can have what? Rakesh can promise the investigation to end and try to end the deadlock. Right? He can use police force to disperse the crowd and end the strike. Right? He can succumb to the demand and allow compensation. Right? He can involve the media and change public perception. Beyond that, he can have other options also. He can allow what? Compensation, but not job to family member. Or maybe he can allow job and not the compensation, and then you evaluate these options, right? You can promise investigation, try to end the deadlock. It will be what? It will be a secure and serious way of handling this issue, but the investigation has already happened and new facts will not essentially help the issue, right? And beyond that, the attempt to end the deadlock might not work. The strikers might not listen to his attempts. Using police force to disperse the crowd can go against his views. It can further instigate the strikers, right? It can also create an understanding that okay, the management is trying to shut down the voice of the protesting people. Then he can succumb to the demands and allow compensation, but that will go against his idea of ethics, right? His own integrity, his own principle of giving compensation only when it is well deserved, right? He can involve the media to change the perception, but again, that will be like planting a story. The merit can be that the facts of the case can come to the surface, right? allow compensation and not the job. He can give some money to help them stand upon their feet. But because a driver's job has to do with skill, and the children are school going, right, and the wife of the deceased driver might not have the skills required, right, so giving a job just because of trying to appease something that has been happening that is wrong, that would create a problem. And same for the optional, right? That's how you analyze these options. What are the dilemmas that he's facing? He's facing rule of law versus positive discrimination. He's facing legality versus affirmative action, the use of force versus non-violence, non-partisanship versus personal ideology, not partaking in different parties, right, not taking a stand but also having his own personal wish of trying to help these people, right? It can be niti and nyay versus misplaced sympathy. Again, whatever comes to your mind, whatever ethical dilemmas you can identify, it works to explain. Then, what is his course of action going to be? Another way of writing course of action is often that you're telling me that you will take a graded approach. You will start small and keep on adding a next step depending upon what is happening, right? So here I can suggest that, okay, you can have a mix of all of these options. You can promise the investigation, try to end the this thing, but deadlock, right? Call in the police, but do not authorize the use of excessive force. You can have the police officers try and reduce the ruckus, if any, right, to keep them on hand to diffuse the situation if it gets any serious, right? He can involve the media to improve the awareness of the facts of the case, right? That sort of thing can be done. The next case is question 12. You are appointed as an officer heading the section in Environment Pollution Control Board. What are the questions that are asked? What are the options available to you under the given situation? Critically examine the options. What type of mechanism could you suggest to ensure environmental compliance? And what are the ethical dilemmas you faced in exercising your options? Now, you are appointed as an officer heading the section in Environment Pollution Control Board to ensure compliance and its follow up. In that region, there were a large number of small and medium industries who had been granted clearance. You learned that these industries provide employment to many migrant workers. Most of these industrial units have got environmental clearance certificate in their possession. The environmental clearance seeks to curb industries and projects that supposedly hamper the environment and living species in the region. But in practice, most of these units remain to be polluting units in several ways, like air, water, and soil pollution. As such, local people encountered persistent health problems. It was confirmed that the majority of the industries were violating environmental compliance. You issued a notice to all these industries, uh, to industrial units, to apply for fresh environmental clearance certificate from the competent authority. However, your action was met with hostile response from a section of industrial units, other vested interest persons, and a section of local politicians. The workers also became very hostile as to you, as they felt that your action will lead to the closure of these industrial units, and the resultant unemployment will lead to financial insecurity and uncertainty in their livelihood. Many owners of the industries approached you with the plea that you should not initiate harsh action, as it would compel them to close their units and cause huge financial loss, shortage of their product in the market. These would obviously add to the sufferings of the laborers and the consumers alike. The labor union also sent you a representation requesting against the closure of the units. You simultaneously started receiving threats from unknown corners. You, however, received support from some of your colleagues who advised you to act freely to ensure environmental compliance. Local NGOs also came to your support, and they demanded the closure of the polluting unit immediately. Now, what are the options available to you? You can continue with this strict vendetta that you have, right? Or what can you do? You can conduct a discussion with the stakeholders, right, and come to a unanimous solution, right, or at least have their facts out in the open. Then you can look for alternate source of employment for the laborers, for the workers of these factories. Then you can also have retrofitting of these plants, right, augmentation of their pollution control systems, right, so that that helps reduce the pollution that is there. So you give that recommendation, and the units can have their environmentally cleared certificates. What are the analysis again? You give me merits and demerits for all of these. Now, what is a mechanism to boost compliance to environmental this thing, licensing. You should have a limited period of validity of a license. The license should only be given for the fixed period, right? If you're doing the environmentally sound practices, you can have the license, but it has to be renewed, right? And for that renewal, you can have surprise audits, right? An official, an expert will come and audit the process. He will come and look at the way that the plant is being run, and only then can they have their license renewed. So it will ensure that the audit, that the unit will always follow the environmental requirements. Then you should also have awareness campaigns mandated for the workers and the local residents, so that they can be assured, they can be aware of the fact that the pollution that is coming from these industries is actually giving them an adverse health impact, right? So all of this will essentially help to improve the compliance of these workers, right, of these stakeholders in the environmental compliance. Again, if you think of other arguments, of course, that is completely welcome. Now, what are the dilemmas that are being faced here, right? There is a trilemma between people, profit, and planet, right? How to select between these three. There is the dilemma of conventional versus compassionate capitalism. Then there is growth versus planet and the environment, the interests of growth and the interests of the planet, of the environment in total. Then there is also the livelihood of a few versus the environment that is common to many. Then there is also compliance to regulations and profit mongering, right? Again, the more elements that you can identify, the more subunits that you can identify, that sort of thing is also useful for these questions, right? So that brings us to the end of the discussion. But what you want to remember is, please remember that the points here are still very indicative, right? They are only representative of seeing these questions, of seeing these issues in hindsight. When you were writing this paper in the examination, you might have had a different interpretation, and as long as it makes sense, you do deserve the marks that you should get for writing the paper. For the students who will attempt their mains exams later, coming in the future, you have to practice writing the UPSC GS4 paper. This is one of the longest papers of the entire process, right? So being able to read, comprehend all of these things, being able to come up with these arguments, being able to answer these questions to the best of your ability, it takes a lot of preparation, it takes a lot of practice. All right, so everybody who has to write these papers, please create model answers for the uh, previous year paper. Essentially this paper, you should analyze, you should figure out what the ideal answers would be for you, right? Try writing, and then from me, as usual, it is all the best. Thank you.